Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's episode of our Thrive in China Roundtable, which is all about how to obtain a work permit and residence visa for foreigners in China. Now, the whole reason that I have been bringing out employment issues in the last few weeks and in the next coming weeks is because I had a hope that with the Lianghai sessions occurring, actually, which started on Sunday and are occurring this week, that there would be changes to the policy in regards to zero COVID. And unfortunately, in the opening speech from Xi Jinping, it was very clear that the zero COVID policy will remain the same. So the presentation I'm offering you is basically my normal standard presentation on how to get a work permit and residence visa for foreigners. And at the end of today's session, so stay tuned for that, I will go through the application process of what it means step by step to actually get foreigners onto your payroll and to then apply for the work permit. So I'll be summarizing everything into a nice table that people have an idea of what the step-by-step procedures look like. So today's topic is about getting work permits, residence visas for foreigners in China. What am I seeing right now in the market? I actually am seeing foreigners being relocated to China. It is not easy by any means. You have to find flight tickets. You have to be able to get the work permits prior to actually getting sent over. You have to go through the quarantine regulations, and then there's a bunch of steps that have to happen once you are actually already in China. So I just want people to be aware. And for those of you that have just joined in, I know you're connecting to the audio right now. I want to emphasize again that today we're going to be talking about how to get work permits and residence visas for foreigners in China. Just to highlight very briefly what I said in the intro, for those of you that have just joined, according to Xi Jinping and this week's Lianghai sessions, the COVID zero policy will remain as a status quo. We've all been hoping that there would be a change this week. There is no change. Who knows what will happen at the end of the week, but it looks like the zero COVID policy will remain as is. I have therefore made this presentation based off of that because it seems like there's going to be no updates in regards to quarantining and all of that stuff. What I do want to highlight, and I was saying it earlier, is that I am seeing foreigners actually get their work permits and are in China as we currently speak. There's one family that is doing their last 2 days of the 10-day quarantining in Shanghai. People are relocating, and there is a chance of getting your documents, your work permits and whatnot in China. So there is movement, okay? I know there's been a complete exodus of foreigners in China, but as I spoke yesterday with one individual who highlighted to me that she went out of China purely for her mental health versus anything else. So there has been an exodus, but we are expecting a whole scoop of new foreigners coming in, and there are new foreigners that are coming in. So what we're covering today is we're going to explain China visas. So what visas actually exist and what might be more suitable for some versus others. We're going to look at the work permits and what does it mean with the A, B, and C tiers. We're going to look at the startup visas, which really are for entrepreneurs and business owners. And then I'm going to highlight what is happening currently under the COVID policy in terms of applications. And I have a beautiful table which will highlight the step-by-step procedures to be able to get the work permits, residence visas, etc., and what it means for a family with dependents that are going in. Okay, one thing I want to highlight, why should you be concerned by visa issues in China? I'm not even talking about COVID scenarios, but I have met a lot of companies and business owners and entrepreneurs who have sent individuals, foreigners, to China on business visas when actually they should have been sent over with work permits, be in China on a business visa, but actually employed by the Chinese entity, and yet overstaying their visas, timelines not going according to plan. And in one scenario, which was quite shocking, was actually having the Public Security Bureau come on site to the office to then take the foreigners in custody because they didn't have the right paperwork. So I've visually seen it. It is horrific. It's sad. And all because business owners and entrepreneurs are trying to skimp the system. It doesn't mean that these foreigners get sent to jail or anything like that, although the sensation is probably feeling like that. It just means that ultimately they have a certain period of time to pack up their suitcases, get sent out, and they have to then get the proper paperwork after that. The other is overstaying your welcome. This has happened to several of my clients who just, again, due to timings and not being able to calculate appropriately, or not even checking in their visas about the dates that are stated in there and not putting them in the calendars, have overstayed their welcome. And it always gets a bit of a shock when they want to travel abroad again and they go through immigration and suddenly there's a penalty of 5,000 renminbi that it hits you, but it has to be paid in cash. So these things have happened. The penalties are going up, especially if you overstay your welcome a lot longer than you should. So there are price penalties depending on how long you've overstayed. Just please make sure that you are looking at the appropriate dates within your visas and you do the renewal process ahead of time so you're aware of it. And I'll explain a little bit on renewal processes under the COVID regulations a bit later. So types of visas. Now, there are a lot of visas that are actually being offered to foreigners coming into China. The most common one is the tourist visa, which is the L visa, which currently is not being issued. You have then the non-commercial visit visa, which is the F visa, also not being issued. What is being issued at the moment are business visas, which is the M visa, and the work visa, which is the Z visa. Business visas basically mean you're going to China on a business trip for a certain amount of time. You've got an invitation letter from a company that's based in China and you have your business visa granted. Please don't ask me in the chat box, how long are these business visas for? This will totally depend on the Chinese consulate or embassy where you are applying. Pre-COVID, you could have applied for a 1-month visa, 3-month visa, leaving every 30 days, or a 6-month visa, leaving every 30 days, or even up to a 1-year visa, leaving every 30 days. Now, I do not know what the consulates and embassies are issuing. My advice would be reach out to them, have that conversation so you have clarity. It will be different from country to country. Work visas are actually the visa by which you enter China in at the point that you've got the work permit issued. So when you know that you're seconding somebody, a foreigner, to China, you start the process in China to get the work permits. They then take the documents of that work permit to the consulate in whatever country they're in. And then they get a Z visa, which is valid for a specific amount of time, allows you to enter China. And then that Z visa will be converted into a formal residence visa once you are in China. And that remains to be called the Z visa, that residence visa. Okay, I'm not going to go through these other types of visas, but it's just for people to realize that there are plenty of visas out there. Everything from the student visa, crew member, which is airline pilots and the crews of airlines or even boats, journalist visas, transit visas, which are not being issued at the moment. You can't transit through China for anything. Residence visa is the D visa. And then you have family and personal visits. So for example, if you want to invite your parents to come, they would get a Q visa. Or other types of relatives, it would either be a Q or an S. So it's just really important to know that all of these visas exist. But like I said, be aware that regulations are consistently changing. It's important to have open dialogue and communication with the Chinese embassy consulate in your home jurisdiction, the one that is closest to you. And obviously, when you are trying to get relatives, which I don't think you should probably do that with the quarantine regulations at the moment, when you are trying to get relatives or family members over, dependents over, it is important to check what the local regulations are for that as well. Just remember, though, that even for family, personal visits, or relatives flying over, they have to do the visa application in their home jurisdiction. You would have to supply a series of documents from China but they actually formally have to get those applications. Now, just a note on business visas that I want to highlight. I have recently had one client who was able to send out 4 foreigners on a business visa to China, all actually applying from different locations, 2 applying from the UK, 1 from Italy, and I believe 1 from Uruguay. And the one from Italy actually got denied on the first round of applications. They asked what document or information was missing. They then resubmitted and it was then approved as well. So please don't give up. If an embassy or consulate is rejecting a visa, ask them why. Are there documents that are missing? Is information not correct, etc., so that you can then reapply. All 4 in the end arrived in China, did their 10-day quarantines. One did 13 days because their room was next to a positive COVID case, so they had to spend an additional 3 days in quarantine. But now they're released and they are traveling throughout Shanghai on business. Just note again that when you are doing a business trip to China at the moment, and I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, I apologize, that there are still districts within a city and there are still cities that are in lockdown. It is less in your face in the media, but since the since the national holidays from October 1st to October 7th, when they came back on the Monday, the 10th, there were 2 schools that were in lockdown for 2 weeks because of COVID cases among students. There were residential buildings that were in a lockdown because of COVID cases. But it is not the formal lockdown of what it was like in April, May, and June. It's less strict, it's less rigid, but you still have to do a COVID test every 48 to 72 hours. So, you can do your business trips going to China, just be aware of these restrictions and limitations that are existing. And that also means that traveling between cities might not be so easy. We have one client today actually who said they wanted a staff member from Shanghai to travel to Shenzhen for a trade show. And ultimately, Shenzhen's rules are that if you're coming from Shanghai, you have to do a certain amount of quarantining before you're free to visit Shenzhen. So again, you have to be aware of all of these local regulations, and I hear about them through clients and their activities. I don't read this through the news outlets or anything like that. I do know that some chambers of commerce are posting these types of updates, especially through WeChat. So if you want to get these updates, connect with certain chambers of commerce on WeChat and you'll get their mailing lists and you will get these updates. The last 2 that I want to highlight is the highly qualified persons are these are really high level personnel, and you need to have been either invited by the government or by a very well-known university to have this R visa. And then obviously, last but not least, you have the diplomatic and service visa. So I want to go a little bit more in depth on what really is the Z visa, okay? So the Z visa, which is known as the work visa, is issued to foreigners employed by a company that's been established and incorporated in China. Z visas are issued prior to the entry into China, and you need to submit documents, like I said, that have been issued from the labor bureaus in China so that you're able to then get this Z visa. Once you are, and pre-COVID, these Z visas were actually only valid for 30 days. Now they have been extended because 10 out of those 30 you're going to spend in quarantine. So they have expanded on those, or even if they still write 30 days, you have more of a leniency to get all the other steps done. Just don't postpone it for too long. In addition to that, a key component is that when you are applying for the employment documents from the Labor Bureau, you will have to specify from which jurisdiction the Z visa will be issued. For example, if it's the UK, we will have to state in the employment with the Labor Bureau that the Z visa will be issued from a consulate or embassy in the UK. If it's Hong Kong, etc. So you have to know where your foreigners are going to be residing so that they can then apply for the Z visa. And then as a service provider, you have to know those details as well. When applying for the work permit, the employer's business license, tax registration certificates, all of these documents have to be submitted. So your company in China needs to be fully incorporated. In addition to that, you need to have at least one mainland Chinese person on your payroll before you are able to apply for work permits and residence visas. Okay. Now, if you are looking to hire foreigners that are already residing in China, but they're going to change from one company to yours, this is much, much easier because you don't have to go through the hoopla. The foreigner can stay in China, and it's just a matter of updating their work permit to the new company, to your company, and indirectly then the residence visa also gets updated. Now, the M visa or the business visa, this was introduced in 2013. Before that, it was the F visa. That was the business visa. So sometimes people do mistake the M from the F. The M visa is what allows you to travel into China now on business trips. You do not need to have a PU letter. There is no concrete definition of what PU stands for. It's basically an approval letter from the Chinese government in the city where you're traveling to allow you to come and visit. These are no longer required, which is amazing, which means that you just simply have to go to the Chinese embassy and consulate, say that you want to get a multiple entry visa for however long. I know in Luxembourg, they can grant you M visas for up to 1 year, multiple entry, and you do have to exit in and out for 3 days. Just keep in mind, if you exit to Hong Kong, there's no quarantine there, but if you re-enter China, you will have to do the quarantining all over again. So please do keep that in mind. Prior to COVID, if you were in locations like the US or Canada, you would be able to apply for 10-year M visas. This is no longer the case with COVID regulations. But again, like I said, have a conversation with your consulate or embassy. Pre-COVID, you could also have applied for in the UK, I know, as well as in Hong Kong, you could have applied for 3-year M visas, where every visit is for 30 days. I'm pretty sure none of these are existing today. But just keep in mind that they are issuing M visas, there just might be certain restrictions in them. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Work permits. In 2017, the Chinese government completely updated the concept of bringing foreigners into China. And as a consequence, they completely updated the application procedures for work permits. The question, what talent tier are you in, just specifies what type of work permit you are going to receive from the Chinese government and whether you will have benefits or not from them. As you can imagine, if you have a tier A visa versus a tier C visa, work permit, sorry, not visa, work permit, tier A is the highest category, which means you get more benefits than if you are in a tier C. 80% of all foreigners lie in the category of B, okay? And I will explain to you what criteria they go through to allocate you into these tiered sections. So, like I said, there's been a complete change to the system. You are, as you are applying for your employment licenses to hire foreigners, you have a point scoring system that the foreigner will go through to see in which tier they're going to fall under. The qualifications are as follows. They will look at the annual salary paid by the employer. Now, if you are receiving a salary of 50,000 renminbi and above, it does not mean that you'll be in the tier A, but it will be a very high mark for you to be in tier A. They will look at your educational qualifications or your vocational skills. Now, I know this from Germany. In Germany, you don't necessarily go to a university per se to get qualified, especially if you're in the technical area. You might go to vocational universities. In the past, these vocational educational licenses were not even accepted. You needed to have a university degree, and you had to have been out of university for 2 years. Now, with these new qualifications, they're looking at your actual qualifications. They're going to want to see university degree copies or vocational qualification copies. So make sure you've got those. I've had a lot of friends of mine who they got lost, however you want to say it. So if you don't have them, reach out to your universities or vocational programs to reissue them because you will need them. And obviously, if you've got an MBA, you are going to earn more points than if you only have a vocational skill qualification, okay? They're going to look at your work experience, which means that if you are a new graduate with no job experience, you're going to get 0 points. Whereas if you're somebody with 25 years of working experience, you'll get a lot more points, all right? Your time spent working in China is calculated by the number of points you worked in China. And by working, it does not mean business trips. It means that you have been previously employed in China and there's a record of you in China. If there's no record of you, you have 0 points. If you have had a history, then obviously you will earn more points. They will check your Mandarin proficiency. If you have 0 proficiency, 0 points. If you've got a lot of proficiency and you actually speak it, they will ask for your test exams to verify that. Location of employment, for example, if it's Shanghai, Chengdu, etc., you will also earn a certain amount of points. They're trying to attract more foreigners to the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. They will look at age, and then any extra credit that you want to highlight in your resume, they will also take that accordingly. Now, what does this mean? It means they take these qualifications and there's a point system. You then calculate the total point system. And if you score at least 85 points, then you are within the tier A. Now, most of the time, tier A means that you are an expert in your field and have been recognized as such. You are from middle to senior management, working for large organizations. You've worked for an NGO, a charity, etc. Those are the people that are usually going to be in the 85 points. Or, for example, if you're a scientist or something to that effect, okay? So this is why I say a small portion of people will fall under tier A. The majority of people will be in the tier B, where they will score between 60 and 84 points, okay? And again, it's because you have a certain skill set, managerial, technical, whatever, R&D, that will bring prosperity to China, basically, is what they're saying, or that you are in an engineering technical sector, or obviously if you are in a managerial role in China, those people are generally within this tier B category. Now, if you are seconding foreign interns, if you are seconding junior individuals, I openly say it's going to be much harder for those types of individuals to be able to get the work permits and residence visas for China, okay? You've got to imagine that the Chinese government wants you to hire locals to increase the local prosperity, right? So if you are seconding foreigners, you have to show the reason behind it. Now, if you are seconding a technical guy, it's probably because you can't find that skill set in China. If you're hiring somebody from a managerial role, it makes complete sense. You're a foreign investor, you're bringing a foreigner over who's worked for your company for a number of years and has that managerial skill set and is a representative of the company in China. If you start wanting to second 20 foreigners to China who are pretty much all in the same roles, this becomes suspicious and is a red flag for the Chinese government. So you need to be aware of these little tidbits and get advice around who you can and cannot bring over. Age is a huge factor as well. My recommendation would be to not bring people over who are 55 and up. Much harder to get visas, particularly if you are in 60 and up, because those are retirement ages and they will not grant the visas for people who are going into retirement. There is a lot of hoopla right now of the 20, 30-year experienced individuals who have hit their 60s. They are having to get immigration lawyers to get the visas renewed because the government doesn't want them to stay. They bring no value. Harsh, I realize, but it is what it is. So tier A basically means, oh, and I've even got the stat here. Tier A comprises of approximately 16% of all foreigners that are applying for visas. So it's a very small majority. These are individuals that have additional benefits compared to tier B and tier C candidates or employees. They have a green channel service, which means that whenever they're renewing their visas or they're getting their visas issued or work permits issued, it takes like 5 working days versus the 10, 15 working days if you're a tier B. Moreover, they are not subject to certain age requirements. I mean, but it's predominantly because they are experts in their field and they've acquired a certain work experience and visibility within the communities and are well known that they are in this category. Tier B, as I highlighted, requires a bachelor's degree and 2 years of working experience, okay? So new graduates and things like that, that's just not find somebody who has that skill set in China. Okay. Yeah, always have to have that in the back of your mind. Now, tier C is meant for individuals not planning to work in China for an extended period of time. So these are usually people on work projects. Prior to COVID, there was this Chinese government talent initiative with France, where they were bringing over 1,000 interns into China. These interns were they were in the tier C category. They were not students, so they weren't applying for student visas. They were applying actually for the Z visa and then the D residence visa. So please be aware of that. There has to be some type of a government connection to be able to get those types of visas, and there are quotas. So they're not like issuing thousands of those at a time. So please be aware of that as well. Startup visas in China are specific to those of you that are looking to, or those of you that have a vision and an idea. You are probably already studying in China and you want to incorporate this idea and vision in the Chinese market, and therefore you want to convert your student visa into a startup visa. Now, this example is for Shanghai, whereby international students are studying in China. They have ideas, generally science related, and they want to set up their own businesses. But obviously, they need a visa to be able to stay, and they can convert their student visa into a startup visa. Generally, these visas are only valid for 1 year because the idea is that they incorporate their own entity and structure, where then they get a work permit and residence visa, and the startup visa then converts to a D visa, which is the residence visa under their own company. They have to have a business plan in place. They have to get that business plan approved, and then they can move forward. All right, so looking at COVID, and what does this mean? So I'm going to start off probably with the not so much fun stuff, which is exemption from overseas punishment. What was happening during the pandemic in the last 3 years is that with the various lockdowns and with government offices being shut, a lot of foreigners had their visas being running over, right? Meaning they surpassed their validity. And nobody could get them renewed because none of the government offices were open or anything like that. So in those situations, and particularly it happened again this year during the Shanghai lockdowns, where a lot of people had their visas run out. And in those situations, basically, it's important to have communication with the bureaus. The bureaus are still open, and I will provide you a slide specific for Shanghai, where there is a 24-hour 7-day-a-week hotline that you can call, services in English, where you can reach out and say, what do I do in XYZ circumstances? Now, pre-COVID, you would have had very high penalties. Like I said, a friend of mine actually went through immigration and had to pay 5,000 renminbi in cash because her visa was 90 days over. She completely forgot to renew it. So it can be hefty. In many instances, companies won't remind you. But since COVID and in the last 3 years, exemption has been provided. No penalties have been raised if you overextend it. Now, obviously, if you're doing this on purpose because you've been fired or whatever, the government has a record of all of this. So it's only going to work if you are fully aware that you've forgotten it and whatnot, right? And it has to be related to the company. You should still be employed by that company. All right. The next step is we're going to look at the actual application procedure, all right, how to add foreigners to your entity. So when you have an entity in China, okay, I don't have a translation for this, but basically you need to have one local employee on your head count. And no service provider can help you with this step. That's why I've written Woodburn cannot assist in this application, because we cannot represent the company when going to the Labor Bureau. But basically you have to open up within the company a system with the Labor Bureau for hiring foreigners. And that one local employee or the legal representative, but I just want to highlight that most legal representatives don't reside in China. So it's always based up to the local employee to open this account. And they have to physically submit documents at the Labor Bureau to open this account. So like I said, it's either the legal rep. In 100% of my instances, all of my clients, the legal rep does not reside in China. So they've had to rely on the local employee to do this work. When you open this system, you can then apply for the work permit. Okay, so it's a notification of application for work permit. You should, at this point, include all family members that are going to be relocating as well, and that includes then all the dependents. This is basically getting then the employment license, where you take this document to the Chinese embassy or consulate in the jurisdiction where that foreigner is residing. Okay, so once step 2 is done, the foreigner takes the employment license, goes to the Chinese consulate and embassy in their home jurisdiction, and applies for the Z visa for himself and the S visa for the family members. They then travel, and mind you, I just want to highlight that when you're doing step 3, you most likely will have to show flight ticket, proof of when you're flying, hotels, and also where you're planning on staying after the quarantine. So for example, a service department, okay? You then enter China, you go through immigration, you do the quarantine and isolation, and then you have to do a medical exam on the ground in China. If you have children under the age of 18, they don't have to do these medical examinations, but the foreigner plus any dependents that are over 18 must do this medical examination, okay? And this is done at the medical bureau. They do x-rays, they take blood, they check your eyesight. It's a standard medical check, basically, like a health check. Once this medical examination is done, you then go and apply for your residence visa and work permit, okay? So the employment license is step 2, the work permit, these are 2 separate documents, is step 5, okay? And once you have your residence visa, generally, which is the D visa, it's valid for 1 year and has to then be renewed on an annual basis. Always. It's not that you have it for 1 year and then you can renew for 3 years. It's a process where every year you've got to renew your residence visa. The work permit does not have to be renewed. It's the residence visa, which is the visa that is stuck in your passport, that has to be renewed on an annual basis. So that is currently what the regulations are in terms of the step-by-step procedures. And unfortunately, because legal reps cannot fly to China, everybody is dependent on having that first head count on board to be able to open up this system for foreigners working in China. Now, because of COVID, one of the things that you have to do, which is part of, happens between steps 3, 4, and 5, is your residence registration, from which you do from home now. Pre-COVID, the foreigner and the dependents could go at any point in time to the police station in the district that they were residing in, i.e. where is the service department or where is the home that they're finally going to reside in. And they have to register with the police department there. And then you have a sticker basically that says you're living in that district. Obviously, since COVID, they have brought everything online. And I've provided here the website where the registration is done. And there is the English version as well as now a Korean version. And I believe they're adding different language versions. So it is not complicated to do. And this is how people are registering their residency in China. Again, this is something that the foreigner can just do automatically going through that website, not difficult at all. Community support and 24/7 hotline. Again, this is something that has popped up since COVID. The Exit and Entry Administration has provided people due to lockdowns with a hotline, 12345. You have to have a domestic number to be able to call that, where you can call, speak in English, and get any advice that you want over your work permit, over your visa, over an extension, over not being able to do your medical exam in time, whatever the case might be. You have this hotline that is readily available and very useful. You've got to imagine that during the pandemic, there were moments where things were being processed and regulations were being issued much later. So there was so much confusion going on amongst the foreigners. And you also have to imagine that a lot of foreigners, although they might be able to go around China with basic Chinese, when you start talking about these types of matters, they don't have the vocabulary. So it's important that they set up this hotline so that anybody can call. And what did happen quite often during the pandemic was the fact that companies were not taking responsibility anymore on these aspects, meaning HR departments were not getting involved. Big pity, but it is what it is. So I want people to know that if you're not getting feedback from your own company, you have the ability to make these phone calls as well yourself and get information. And be kind. I mean, I was hoping this week that there were going to be updates on the regulations with the Lianghai sessions, and there are none. It seems like the status quo will remain the same. Who knows what things will look by the end of the year or even up until March when the Senate will be elected. But apparently now the zero COVID policy will remain as is, which makes me believe that the 7+3 quarantine regulations will also remain as is. I have one family that just flew on the 10th of October, actually. They are required to do the full 10 days of quarantine in a hotel because they have no existing residency. They come out on Friday and then they'll move into their service department and do the remaining steps. So it's all doable, guys. Not fantastic. I mean, this family, they've been separated. One parent has one child, other parent has the other child. They're in 2 separate rooms, not connecting. It is what it is. So you've got to be aware that these situations do exist. In their case, their daughters are much older, but it is what it is. This other company, they had 4 foreigners coming in on business visa. This family came in on a work permit, just to say. The 4 that came in on the business visas, 3 got out after 7 days, actually. They flew to Wuhan. They got out of 7 days and got to do the 3 days of isolation in their service department in Shanghai. The other gentleman had to do the full 10 days plus an additional 3 because of a COVID case next to him, in the room next door to him. So it's also a matter of luck where you are in the hotel. So be kind, give time off to these individuals. The family has been telling me that their Wi-Fi connection is just an absolute disaster, even with a mobile Wi-Fi connection. So give time off in these periods because very little can actually be done. So there's items that have been put in the chat. So I'm just going to go through certain questions that have popped in. Okay, so work permits for type Z work visa. Should the application for work and residency permit be done while in China? So I'm going to go back to that table. And maybe this will help answer all those questions. So here, first, the company has to apply for this account to hire foreigners within their organization. This is done by a local employee that's on the head count. Then you apply for the employment license, which is done in China. The family is still abroad. Okay, so the employment license is then applied for in China, is then officially couriered over and taken then to the Chinese embassy and consulate with supporting documents. Therefore, it's very, very important to ask the consulate and embassy, what is the document list needed to apply for the Z visa? The Z visa is applied overseas, not applied for in China. The Z visa is applied for overseas in the jurisdiction of where that foreigner is living. That foreigner with the Z visa then flies into China, does the quarantine and isolation, medical examination, and then the D visa, so Z visa converts to a D visa, and work permit are applied locally after that medical examination. Daniel, I don't know if that answered then your question on that. You said, how long does it take to get work permits? I cannot answer timelines. This is completely up to the embassy and the consulate. And like I said, you know, this client who applied for the business visas, the first time around, for one guy got rejected in Italy, for the others who submitted exactly the same documents in other embassies and consulates didn't get rejected. So you're asking me times, I cannot tell you. The medical examination is for the step 2 in China, it usually takes 10 working days, employment license. For step 4, quarantine and isolation is 7+3. Examination takes a day. Applying for the residence visa and work permit takes 10 working days. Okay. Another question was traveling across cities in China. Are the restrictions only for foreigners or Chinese? The restrictions are for everybody. Doesn't matter if you're a foreigner or a Chinese national. In the case of my client today, who told me that their Shanghai staff, who was a mainland Chinese, going to Shenzhen, she would have to do quarantine in Shenzhen. So it doesn't matter if you are a foreigner or a local, those policies will apply. Daniel, your question on type M business visas, can invitation letters be issued by sister companies or subsidiaries? Yes, they can. Daniel, I know you. So your entity is already a Chinese company, even whether it's foreign owned or not. It's a company that's registered in China. So it can be the subsidiary that issues the letter. It can be suppliers that issue the letter. It does not matter. Better to have it from the letter. I will just cover the name. I've actually just done this now. We have a client whose Chinese staff is going to be traveling abroad, and the company has to issue, I don't know if you guys can see that, a dispatch letter. So this is sort of what it looks like, saying why are you sending somebody over? You have it stamped and chopped, and you take that to the consulate and embassy. All right, I think those are all the questions that have popped up. If there is any other questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. It is a complicated system, and you just have to go through all the steps one by one to understand how it all works. So, you know, be aware of that. You can ask questions to providers in China. You can ask questions to me. I cannot guarantee anything from the Chinese embassy and consulate side, which is why I say have an open communication and discussion. If you're not getting through to them by phone, have direct meetings. Go to the consulate and embassy, book an online appointment, and have a conversation with them. It's better to spend more time going to the consulates and embassies and getting the right information than spending ages getting piles of documents prepared and actually they don't even accept it. So make sure you have those discussions. Just to finish off, a lot of you know who I am, but if you are interested to learn more about how to employ talent in China, you can reach out to me for a first conversation, no strings attached. And just so you know, in the next few sessions, we're going to be talking about how to calculate income tax in China. The next session will be on social insurance obligations in China. And then we're going into other things on really retaining employees through understanding the business culture, offering low-cost trainings, how to find the right people, etc. And then in December, we're going to be looking at the whole auditing and corporate risk and fraud management as well when you have people on the ground. So stay tuned for those. And again, if you've got any questions, reach out, and happy to have a conversation. Thanks everybody for joining. It was short and sweet, 45 minutes only. So I hope to see you all again soon. Take care and bye.